Hello and welcome back to the Consider the Kirk YouTube channel. I'm your host of this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located here in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. Today I'm doing another video in my Jewish Apologetics series, but this one's going to be slightly different. I am going to look at some Old Testament texts, but today I'm looking at Jesus as the third temple of God. And this is kind of based on a sermon that I wrote for the Feast of the Annunciation this year, in the year 2024. And so I'm basically just going to read from that. And so in this sermon, I read the text from Zechariah chapter 2, verses 10 to 13, where Zechariah is giving this prophecy for the new temple. And in my sermon, I point out that Zechariah's prophecy is not about the then second temple being built, but about the coming temple of Jesus Christ. So let us begin by reading directly from the text itself, Zechariah chapter 2, verses 10 to 13. Sing and rejoice, O daughter Zion, for lo, I will come and dwell in your midst, says the Lord. Many nations shall join themselves to the Lord on that day, and shall be my people, and I will dwell in your midst, and you shall know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. The Lord will inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land, and will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all people, before the Lord, for he has aroused himself from his holy dwelling. So our text begins with a call to rejoice. Rejoice and sing, O daughter of Zion. Now, the daughter of Zion is a reference to the temple, not just the physical building, but as the symbol of God's people. In Revelation 12:2, we learn that the New Jerusalem is the bride of Christ, and as we read in Ephesians 5, the bride of Christ is the church. And so, the New Jerusalem is the church. And so here God is calling his faithful people, the true Israel, to rejoice. And this call to rejoice is then followed up by the reason for why they should rejoice. Because I, God, will come and dwell in your midst. See, in the Hebrew, God uses the word shakan, which is the verbal form of tabernacle. The noun form of tabernacle, which is derived from this verb shakan, is mishkan. In Exodus 25 verses 8 to 9, the Lord said to Moses, "Let them make for me a sanctuary, that I might shakan in their midst, exactly as I show you concerning the pattern of the mishkan." So God said, that I may tabernacle in their midst, and I will show you the pattern of the tabernacle that you are to build. Now in Zechariah, God uses this word again, that he will shakan, he will dwell, he will tabernacle with his people. And so how did the Lord tabernacle with his people? First, he did so in the tabernacle of Moses. Then he did so in the temple of Solomon. And now he is promising the people that he will do it again. And we Christians see this prophecy of Zechariah not as a prophecy of the second temple, but a prophecy of the temple of Jesus Christ. Because we read in John chapter 1:14 that the Word, who is Jesus, tabernacled amongst us in human flesh. Also, we read in the Gospel of John chapter 3 that Jesus refers to his body as the new temple of God. See, the rabbinic Jews who reject the New Testament and reject Jesus as the Messiah, they see this as a prophecy of the second temple built by Ezra. Now, there is some weight to their claim, because God had tabernacled in the tabernacle of Moses, and he had tabernacled in the temple of Solomon. And he was now coming to dwell or tabernacle in this second temple, the temple of Ezra. Also, according to the book of Ezra, chapter 5:1 and chapter 6:14, the prophets Haggai and Zechariah were both prophesying during the construction of the Second Temple. Also, as I mentioned above, the term daughter of Zion is a reference to the temple in Jerusalem. Thus, the Jews would claim that this prophecy is not about some coming Messiah, but this is the prophecy just about the Second Temple, which is being built in front of them. And so the Jews do have a rather strong argument. However, there is one major flaw in this belief, and this is found in verse 11. See, God promised to come and tabernacle with his people. But then in verse 11, he states that many nations will be joined to the Lord in that day. The issue with interpreting the prophecy of Zechariah in reference to the Second Temple of Jerusalem is that the many nations did not come and join the people of Israel after the Second Temple was built. After the Second Temple is built, more and more Jewish people returned from exile to the land of Judah, but there was no mass conversion of Gentiles at this period. There is also the reference to that day. If the day of Zechariah 2:11 was meant to refer to the day that the Lord came to dwell in the Second Temple, which happened after its completion, then where is this mass conversion of the Gentiles? There is no such conversion. For centuries afterwards, the Jews and the Gentiles remained separated. In fact, following the construction of the Second Temple, one of the first things Ezra did was force the Jewish men to divorce their Gentile wives. The New Testament does make mention of proselytes. These are non-Jewish converts. But again, these are few in number. There is no mass conversion of Gentiles to Judaism. There is no mass flocking of Gentiles into the Jewish faith. Additionally, the Second Temple has now been destroyed, and there has still not yet been this massive conversion of Gentiles to the Jewish faith. Thus, if Zechariah's prophecy was about the Second Temple, then he was lying because it was a false prophecy that never came true. Now the Jews could argue back against us. They could say, well, you Christians claim that this prophecy is about Jesus and that it is about the incarnation of Jesus, but there was no mass conversion of Gentiles at the conception or birth of Jesus. In response to this, we need to demonstrate that there is a misunderstanding here as to what the term day refers to. That day is not referring to a single day, like a single 24-hour period, such as the day Jesus was born. God says that he will come and dwell amongst his people. And that dwelling was not for a single day, but for a longer period of time. And so the conversion of the Gentiles does not need to happen on a single day, but over this period of time while God is dwelling with his people. And so the Jews could argue back that, well, based on that logic, then there didn't need to be a mass conversion of Gentiles on the day that the Second Temple was built. It just needed to happen during the time period that the Second Temple existed. And that's the problem with the Jewish claim that this prophecy is a reference to the Second Temple. The Second Temple lasted for over 500 years. The day of the Second Temple is the time period from when the Second Temple was built in the days of Ezra up until its destruction in 70 AD. And yet, during that time period, there was still no mass conversion of Gentiles to Judaism. So therefore, this prophecy cannot be a reference to the Second Temple. It must be a prophecy in reference to a third temple. in which when that temple is existing, there will be a mass conversion of Gentiles to the true religion, to the true Jewish faith, or to the true people of God. That will take place in the days of the third temple. Zechariah's prophecy cannot be referring to the second temple, it must be referring to a third temple. And as Christians, we believe that that third temple is the human flesh of Jesus, his human nature. Jesus calls his body the temple of God. In the beginning of John's Gospel, we are told that the Word of God tabernacled in the human flesh of Jesus. We Christians see Jesus as this third temple. And now the Jews are going to argue back and say, no, the third temple can't have been Jesus because there was no mass conversion of Gentiles during the life of Jesus. So you Christians believe that the day Zechariah is referring to is not a single 24-hour period, but to all the days that God is dwelling with his people. And that it can't refer to the second temple because there was no mass conversion of Gentiles during the existence of the second temple. It must instead refer to some third temple which was to come. But that third temple can't be Jesus because Jesus was born, lived, died, and as you Christians claim, ascended to heaven, and yet there was no mass conversion of Gentiles during the life of Jesus. Therefore, Jesus cannot be the third temple. However, all of this is a misunderstanding as to how the two natures of Jesus work and how the incarnation worked and how God continues to dwell with his people today through word and sacrament. See, before the incarnation, if you wanted to go and be in God's presence, you had to go to the temple in Jerusalem, because that is where God promised his presence to be. All of this changed on the day when Jesus was incarnate in human flesh. Now, if you wanted to be in the presence of God, you had to be in the presence of Jesus. Now the presence of God was no longer limited just to the temple in Jerusalem, but was now present anywhere Jesus was present. So when Jesus was at Cana, God was present at Cana. When Jesus was at Bethlehem, God was dwelling in Bethlehem. The temple of God is now Jesus. And wherever the human flesh of Jesus went, there was the temple of God. The temple of God used to be stationed just in Jerusalem. If you wanted to go to God's temple, you had to go to Jerusalem. But now, if the people won't come to Jerusalem, if the people won't come to the temple will come to them. God made the human flesh of Jesus to be his temple, and so wherever the flesh of Jesus was present, there the temple of God was also present. And this is important because now Jesus has ascended into heaven and he sits at the right hand of God, and yet he is still present everywhere. See, this is important to understand the two natures of Jesus and how the communion of attributes work. When God took on human flesh, he made that flesh his temple. And with the two natures of Jesus, the communion of attributes is that when Jesus does something, he does it not as the human Jesus or the God Jesus, but he does it as the whole Jesus. And so whenever Jesus is present, he is present with both his humanity and his divinity. And Jesus' humanity is now the temple of God. And so wherever Jesus is present with his divinity, his humanity is there also. And so wherever Jesus' divinity is present, his humanity is present. And wherever his humanity is present, the temple of God is now present. Therefore, the temple of God through the incarnation of Jesus is now omnipresent. As I said, the temple of God used to be restricted to Jerusalem. But then the temple of God is present wherever Jesus is present. And because Jesus is God, Jesus is omnipresent. Therefore, the human flesh of Jesus, the temple of God, is now omnipresent. Therefore, Jesus, the temple of God, is not just dwelling at the right hand of the Father, but he is present everywhere, especially where his word and his sacraments are present, and wherever his name and his word is preached, and wherever his name and word is physically distributed through baptism and Holy Communion, there Jesus is present, there the temple of God is present. And so God is continuing to dwell with us today. He is Emmanuel, God with us. See, when Jesus took on human flesh and became incarnate, God began to dwell with us everywhere, not just in the temple of Jerusalem, but wherever his word is present, there he is, as Jesus tells us in Matthew 18, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, there he is present. And if Jesus is present there, since Jesus is now the temple of God, there the temple of God is present. And so this mass conversion of Gentiles to the true people of God has happened. Because the day of the Messiah, the day of the third temple, began with the incarnation of Jesus when he was conceived. And it continues on now to this very day. See, the day of the Messiah did not end with his ascension into heaven. The day of the Messiah exists now today. We are still in the Messianic age. And so this prophecy of Zechariah of God coming to dwell with us, that is still today. That prophecy began with the incarnation of Jesus, in the conception of Jesus, and that day will continue on till his return at the second coming, when he will come to judge the living and the dead. And so the prophecy of Zechariah is not about the temple of Jerusalem, the second temple. It is about Jesus Christ, the third temple. And that day is today. That day began with the conception of Jesus, and that day continues up until his second coming. We are now in the day that Zechariah prophesied. And therefore, if we are now in that day, then rejoice and be glad, because God is dwelling with you. Wherever 2 or 3 gather in his name, there he is dwelling in your midst. There he is tabernacling with you. There the temple of God is present with you. No longer do you need to travel to Jerusalem to see the temple, because God has brought the temple to you. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.